Oh, hi. Today I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people ask about, but not a lot of people talk about. How do you use a reference photo? How do you work from a detailed reference photo? Maybe it's a dog, maybe it's a horse. And today we'll talk about a dog, but how do you go from a super detailed photo and convert that into your painting? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to use this cutie and I'm going to show you my process. And this is exactly what we talk about in my workshops. So if you are interested in this process, come along with me and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is, let's say you've been asked to paint somebody's dog and they send you a photo. Now, the photo's probably not going to be this nice. This is quite obviously a professional photographer who took this. We've got beautiful lighting. You can see the reflection in the dog's eye. And so it's not always the case. I am often handed some of the worst reference photos. Okay, here's one. So this cutie is Quill. And this is actually pretty decent. And I popped the contrast, I brightened it, I edited a little bit. So I was a professional photographer for a good decade. And so I bring those skills into my art practice. Yeah, the first thing I do is bring it into my phone, and I can show you how that's done. So if you have a reference photo, same thing with this one. I brightened it up so much so that I could make sure that I know what I'm looking at. So that's the first thing I do when I'm given a reference photo. Back to this cutie. We've lovingly named him Brutus. So in all my workshops, we try to name whatever animal we're drawing. And this little cutie is Brutus. Does he not look like a Brutus? So cute. Okay, so I got this on Unsplash. I really like Unsplash because they have a really great royalty-free reference photos that you can use. And so if I'm just practicing or I'm teaching, I will just use those. If it's a pet portrait commission, then I am going to do my best to brighten it up and get it exactly how I want it. I will change the temperature, I will sharpen it, or I will make it more blurry. It depends, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the most important thing to me is that the image has the eye shine going on. That is what brings them to life. If the image doesn't have a reflection in the eye, you can add it. You have to decide which direction the light is coming from, and you can add your own little boop white dot to the eye, and that often changes it quite a bit. Okay, so what I want to talk about really today is simplifying. Now, I had decided a couple weeks back this was my subject. I loved that pink tongue, and I said, I'm going to have this be our subject for my online live workshop. And I didn't really think about it being complicated or anything. I just thought it looked like a lot of fun. Well, as I always do, I got out my sketchbook in preparation for teaching this. I always paint this at least once before I teach other people. And so I got out my sketchbook, and here it is. And this is just an inexpensive US Art Supply sketchbook, pulp paper. I choose my colors. That's the first thing that I do. And so the way that I go about choosing those colors, there's a couple of different things you can do. Not everybody has Procreate, and that's the app that I'm using here. It's called Procreate. You can get it on your phone. That would be Procreate Pocket. It does cost a few dollars, but it's totally worth it in my opinion. But if you don't have it, what I want you to do, sometimes people will take a piece of paper and cut a hole in it and use that to just look at one section, because our eyes trick us, don't they? So look at that. We've got our pink color for the tongue. So that's something you can do just on your phone, is zoom in on areas. Try to focus in. So the first thing I do, I usually keep it around 4 or 5 colors when I do a pet portrait. So the first thing I want to do is find my darkest darks. We've got a pretty black situation going on here. And I will use this eyedropper tool. So you hold down on anywhere and it will give you the color. And so you can kind of see where it's at on the spectrum, and then you can see how light it is. So that's a really helpful tool. I even will make a palette using the image here. So something you can do is new from photos, and then you choose the photo and it will create a palette for you. Now that's given me way too many options and that might be super confusing. So let's go back to this. So I want to know what color I need to use for this little chest area down here. So I'm going to open that up. Looks like burnt umber to me. So I'm well aware of my colors and what I want to use. Something you can do is have swatches of all your colors that you have on your palette. So these are the colors that I have on my Daniel Smith dot card. And so I have them all swatched out here. And so that's something that's really helpful for me when I'm trying to choose my colors. So here I've got transparent brown oxide. And this is just a way that I help myself choose my colors. And then, you know, you can decide what you want to do. This is lunar black. And what I ended up choosing actually was hematite genuine mixed with burnt umber. Oh, I keep doing that. For this chest area here. Okay, so hematite separates out. And that gives you a lovely fur texture. Like this. Isn't that amazing? So a lot of those like super granulating pigments like hematite, which is magnetic, or lunar black, will give you something that looks like fur texture. Because I'm not trying to paint every single fur. I am trying to use texture. So the texture of the paint, the granulation of the paint, the texture of the paper, and I will even use blooms and blossoms and splatters to show fur. Okay, so that's the first thing I do. I pick my colors, and here is where I chose my colors. I played around with a background on this one, and I didn't end up using it on my final painting. But you can see that I picked a few. So I made my tongue color with quinacridone red and nickel azo yellow, and then I used neutral tint for my black and burnt umber for the browns, and then I used Payne's gray, and I was playing with Jane's gray for a client. Okay, so here we've got some mixtures that I made. So it's really handy to have a sketchbook. And you could just do scrap pieces of paper lying around, but it's really nice to have it organized in a book format so that later when I'm doing a painting, I can look back and say, what did I use on this one? And then I can go from there. Just a really great resource to have. So this was my test run. It looks great, right? Sure. We're looking at this and we're going, holy crap, that looks amazing. Here's the problem. This took me like 3.5 hours. This whole situation was so overwhelming because I was working so hard to be extremely detailed. And I wanted to cry because 3 hours doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're trying to teach this in a 2-hour workshop to other people, and it's taking you almost 4 hours at home to complete, and you're frustrated and you're overwhelmed, it's not a good situation to be in. And so like I always do, I told all my woes to my Davy, and he listened to me very kindly and lovingly. And then he looked at me and he said, simplify it. Really? That's all you got? Simplify? And he said, yeah. Anytime that I have a problem in construction, which he's a contractor, he says, I simplify. So he said, simplify it. And I got thinking, and I realized something. I drew every single little line and wrinkle, and I got super hyper detailed. And so I sat back down and I closed my book and I pulled this into my app. The first thing that I did was blur it. So you can do this with your eyes, obviously. You can just unfocus your eyes. And that is one of the biggest tools that I use in my art practice is just unfocus. So I unfocus my eyes and I see my values. I see my lights, my darks, my midtones, and it helps me so much. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to use Gaussian blur I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I use the blur on the iPad. And wow, did that make a huge difference. Okay, let me show you the before and after. So before, super, super crisp details. After. And that did so much to simplify this. Details can really stumble us. One other thing I wanted to mention, color. So our brains will often trick us, especially with pinks and reds. A lot of times pinks and reds are midtones. So I'll go even a step further here. Turn it black and white. So now it's not only blurred, but I have made it grayscale. Now, can you see how that tongue is a midtone? You can easily see where your darkest values, and that means your darkest contrasts. So when we use the word value, we just mean the contrast between your lights and your darks, and then that kind of gray area, which is midtones, which a lot of people, including me, struggle with because it is like a gray area. So the best thing you can do for yourself is turn it black and white. Most phones have the ability to do this, to add a filter and turn it black and white. So this is what I do with my eyes. I just kind of squint at it. And I am telling you, it has been the biggest tool and benefit in my art practice. Super simple, but super valid. So now we can see, wow, look at those. The eyes are really dark, like really, really dark. We're getting color out of the way. Because at the end of the day, yes, color matters. Yes, temperature matters. Yes, color harmony matters. But at the end of the day, if you don't have your contrast right, if you don't have your values where they should be, color won't matter. Your painting will just fall completely flat. So try this out at home. Grab your iPhone or whatever device you have, your iPad. You don't necessarily need Procreate for this. So edit. So we hit the edit button right here at the top. Same on my phone as it is on my iPad. And you actually can blur it a little bit. So if you use, I think it's definition. No, definition makes it worse. So use noise reduction if you have to. That helped quite a bit. See how that got rid of a lot of the details and softened it? So do that. And then don't use the filters if you can avoid it. Go to saturation and bring the saturation all the way down. So now it's blurred a little bit and it's desaturated, and you're still going to want to have the color version. So maybe duplicate it so that you have both color and black and white. But in all of my workshops, I give my students a color, a black and white, and a blurred version. And we just look back and forth the whole time we're painting. I will turn off color for a while and just look at my darks to see how dark I need to go. And then I'll turn the color back on or whatever I need to do so that I can make sure I'm getting my colors right. Because they do matter. They do matter. Okay. So when you take a workshop with me, I give you a traceable. And the reason is that if I were to have my students do this themselves, if I were to say, here's your reference, go to town, draw it out, they're probably going to include every little freckle, wrinkle, dimple, and hair. And we don't want that. We want to simplify. So when I drew the one out in my sketchbook, I drew way too much. So when my Davy said simplify, I brought it back into Procreate. I created a layer on top and I traced it doing the most simplest things that I could. And here is that result. And let me just turn this off for you. So here's the traceable. Doesn't that look so much less daunting? Really, the mouth had a lot of detail, but I simplified it as much as I could. And what I really focused on was drawing the areas where we have a change between lights and darks. So the traceable is huge in that I simplify the photo for my students so that when we paint, and I have the same one drawn on my paper, I didn't on this one, and they're like, you have lines we don't have. I'm like, yeah, there's a story to that. I want to show you my final painting of Brutus. now that I simplified. So you saw my first painting. Let me just remind you what it looked like. I'm happy with it. Of course I am. I could have done without the background, but I'm really happy with this. I spent a lot of time on this. But let me show you, I'll keep that open, my final. And it is bigger. I actually really enjoy painting big. So here's my final. Can you see the difference? So this one definitely has more going on. But guess what? I like this one better. I like the colors better because this one I used, I think, raw umber. And it just kind of felt greenish. And on this one, I used burnt umber. And I added little droplets of the tongue color that we mixed. We mixed our own tongue color. And that's the same color that's up in here. And I let go a lot. This, from far away, it looks great. But when you really look close, look how messy I was. It's not perfect. It's splashy. It's messy. I got blooms and blossoms. And guess what? I kind of love it because I simplified it. It feels fresher to me. And that's the thing we're trying to achieve, right? Like, why do we love watercolor? We love watercolor because it's fresh and magical and luminous. And when we have those transparent layers, the light is allowed to hit the white of the paper and bounce back at us. And that's why we love the luminosity that watercolor brings. And so I don't want to overpower that and lose that by doing way too many layers, being too tight and too detailed. If I wanted to be tight and hyper realistic and detailed, I'd probably be doing acrylic or oil. I really love watercolor and the wildness that it has. And so I want to partner with the medium and make it work for me. So I hope that you learned something today about simplifying. Keep that in mind when you're tracing a reference or sketching out a reference. Only include the information that is absolutely necessary. So your values, so your difference between your lights and your darks and your midtones, include those. And just really try to simplify, let go. And don't try to be so perfect. And at the end of the day, guys, it's just a piece of paper. I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that you learned something today. And I wanted to remind you that I teach workshops every single Wednesday. It's just a small, cozy group. There's usually only about 5 or 6. Last week we had 8. But there's only a few of us. I like it that way. And we laugh and we joke and we just have a lot of fun talking watercolor and painting cute dogs. Right now it's dogs. We'll see what happens. Everybody wants dogs right now. So maybe down the road we'll be doing cats and horses and birds. And I fully plan on it. But right now we are painting dogs and I'm not mad about it. So either join a workshop or I do offer the replays on YouTube and they are significantly less expensive than the live workshops. And so you get to watch a live workshop on the replay. So those are all on my website. The link will be in the description. And this guy included, he is on my website to watch the replay. And you will also be provided everything you need. The supply list, the reference photo, the traceable, everything. I also offer a 20-minute complimentary call with me to discuss any questions that you may have. By the way, we hit 800 this week. I'm just incredibly grateful for everybody who has subscribed, who has liked, who has commented, and also all of my beloved students. We have a lot of fun and I really appreciate it. Peace out. I hope you have an amazing day. See you next week.